2026 could be one of the most important years in history for American soccer. As co-hosts of the biggest ever World Cup, with dreams of a deep knockout run, fans are hoping that this summer will take the already flourishing game and make it even bigger. Welcome to Kickback Soccer Media's World Cup Capsules, where you'll learn everything you need to know about all 48 of the national teams competing at the 2026 World Cup. From the history of the game, the nation's current World Cup trajectory, unsung heroes, and cultural moments. I'm David Goss, and today we're talking about my nation, the red, white, and blue. We're talking about the United States of America. The World Cup is almost upon us. It's being held in our own backyard, and excitement is high. But the sport feels like it's constantly on the come up in America, at least from a certain lens.
I hope that we're not waiting every 4 years for the needle to be moved during the World Cup during times of here.
You might recognize that voice. That's USMNT legend Clint Dempsey.
A sensational goal from Clint Dempsey.
And Dempsey has done it!
And it's Clint Dempsey again!
I hope the U.S. inspires the nation, gets everybody believing, they go on a deep run and do something kind of like what we saw from the team in 2002, but more so like what we saw from South Korea being the host country during that tournament and going on a deep run. That would be great to see, but just every year being the mainstream sport and not waiting for the every 4 years for it to be in the same category.
This has been a constant struggle for American soccer fans, and there's even more conversation around it this time. If this will finally be the moment, that elusive tipping point where the game doesn't go away for 4 years. There are a lot of factors. There are a lot of things to talk about, so let's get into it. A quick disclaimer. There's going to be a lot of hand-wringing, and there has been, about how to measure the USMNT success, what it'll take to get there, etc. And we do want to acknowledge the U.S. national team has already found an insane amount of success on the women's side. The women's national team are 4-time World Cup winners. They're pioneers of the women's game. They are general badasses. They are arguably the greatest team sport team in the history of the world. So all of this conversation will be on the men's side, but you cannot lose that context of the incredible team that the U.S. does already sport. Soccer in the United States goes so much deeper than most think. There were several milestones happening in the United States before we even hit the first World Cup. There was the first game using association football rules back in 1866. The first soccer league in America, the Western Football Association in St. Louis, 1883. The United States Soccer Federation earned FIFA status, and the start of the US Open Cup, both all the way back in 1913. By the 1920s, the ASL of American Soccer League was considered the second most popular pro sports league behind Major League Baseball. So the roots of the game go incredibly deep in the United States, even if there is the common inaccurate refrain that the game is still new here. But like any country with a long history of the game, there has been plenty of drama, and might also help explain why the game didn't take over the country the way it did elsewhere. There's the American Soccer Wars, internal conflicts between various leagues during this time period that prevented a true structure from being built. The soccer wars are a sadly common occurrence in the US. As leagues tried to find their feet, competing leagues split the resources and focus, which ended up killing momentum. In the modern day, we have a perfect example. Right now, the USL is preparing to start a competing men's Division I league against MLS. There are 2 different third divisions on the men's side, and there are currently 2 different Division I women's leagues in the U.S. These leagues have to be sanctioned by the U.S. Soccer Federation, which isn't without blame in all these issues. This infighting all the way back from the 1920s, compounded with the Great Depression and World War II, killed off all the momentum of the sport. And the next 50 years are considered the dark days in soccer. There was no pro program and very little international activity. But we do want to take a moment to mention here that there were 2 entities that kept the little flame of soccer alight in the U.S. during this 50-year dark period. There was college soccer, which has an incredible history and ended up leading to the development of many of the coaches and players who helped bring the game back at the highest ranks internationally and the pro game. And then there is this incredible network of ethnic leagues across the U.S., built by people who came to the U.S. and wanted to play soccer and engage with soccer the way they did in the countries they were from. And you see it in the history of the U.S. Open Cup. It was the second longest continuous running cup tournament in the world behind the FA Cup before it was forced to take a 1-year delay because of COVID. And when you look at the winners of this competition and just the names, you understand the varied immigrant backgrounds that have kept the sport alive and grown the game. You have the early history, which we will talk about, of the Scottish and the Germans. You have the New York Hakoah, who was a team of Jewish immigrants that came together to play and was able to win a couple tournaments in the 1920s and 1930s. You have the Chicago Sparta, a team of Czech immigrants. You have Brooklyn Hispano. You have Hoda and Gachi in New York. You have all of the German American organizations that were created in the Midwest that went on to win championships. The Philadelphia Ukrainians, the New York Ukrainians, the Greek Americans. And then you go out west and you look at the teams that were built in San Francisco and the leagues that were created there, and the Maccabi Los Angeles team that went on to be the most successful team in the US Open Cup in the 1970s and 1980s. It shows you the diversity across the game, and that is what has kept it alive over the last 100 years, even when the pro ranks weren't there. All the way through to the creation of Major League Soccer in 1996, you had CD Mexico, who won the 1993 US Open Cup, now known as El Farolito, out in San Francisco. You had the Greek Americans in San Francisco, who won the 1994 before the pro teams were able to re-enter the fold. And of course, in 1967, you had one of my favorite periods of American soccer, the NASL.
The return of Pelé has attracted worldwide interest.
Beckenbauer follows it in. He scores.
That's Cruyff. Zidane will on. What a move.
Out to the left side.
The North American Soccer League felt like a fever dream. It sprung up seemingly out of nowhere and attracted some of the biggest stars in the game. Pelé, Beckenbauer, Johan Cruyff, George Best, Eusebio. The league felt big, flashy, exciting. The money was flowing. The league was growing and crowds were packing the stadiums, especially in New York, where the Cosmos were one of the hottest tickets in town. Barely a part of the FIFA ecosystem, they didn't play an international competition in CONCACAF or the National Cup in the US Open Cup. They barely played domestic players, as they tried to change that as it went along with requirements, and they switched the league to bizarre rules like countdowns on the clocks, 35-yard set off sidelines like hockey, bonus standing points for goals scored, and whatnot. The league reached its peak in 1978 with 24 clubs and the league averaging over 14,000 fans per game. But nothing as big or as great as the NASL was meant to last, and the league grew too big too fast. When the league's debt built up and the economy faltered, the bulk of the league's quick buck owners quit, and the league officially folded in 1985. But one of the league's last contributions was putting in motion the dominoes that would lead to the country's next and current domestic league, Major League Soccer. NASL tried to push big for the 1986 World Cup hosting rights after Colombia was forced to drop out. They had Pelé and Beckenbauer lead the bid, but they still lost to Mexico. U.S. soccer officials and soccer supporters turned around and won the bid to host 1994 using a very similar bid book to 1986. One of the conditions from FIFA for granting the hosting rights was a requirement to restart a domestic men's first division. Hence, MLS was planned and created, eventually launching in 1996 with 10 clubs. MLS launching with the lessons learned from NASL went with a centralized and slow growth model. It started with 10 clubs. They did carry over some quirky rules, but Major League Soccer survived, and there are a couple big benchmark moments that have happened since 1996. There was some contraction coming out of 96 when the league struggled, but 2007 is considered a turning point when David Beckham joined, and it started the ability in a DP rule to bring in star players. We eventually went on to have players like Lionel Messi and Carlos Vela, Sebastian Giovinco, Cuauhtémoc Blanco, some of the biggest names in the world and some of the biggest names in the league. That led to a series of expansion, and from 2015 to 2025, the league added 12 clubs to now a 30-club league. MLS is a huge part of the American soccer identity, for better or for worse. Despite the United States' deep soccer history, its World Cup journey is much more modern one. Though the first two appearances were at the first two World Cups in 1930 and 1934, where the U.S. finished 16 out of 16, they had a memorable run in 1950, and we'll get to more on that later. But the U.S. didn't start consistently qualifying for the World Cup until the 90s. That journey kicked off in 1990 when they booked their first ticket in 40 years with Paul Caligiuri's famous shot heard round the world against Trinidad and Tobago. Though the U.S. was back on the world stage, they still struggled for most of the 90s. They finished 23 out of 24 teams at the 1990 tournament. In 1994, where they hosted, and we'll talk about a little more, they made it out of the group stage as one of the top third-place teams, but lost to Brazil in the round of 16, and then they finished dead last at the 1998 World Cup in France. But since 2002, there have been big and memorable moments. 2002 was a tournament that made a lot of U.S. fans fall in love with the sport. Bruce Arena took the reins of the national team and had a mixed squad of experienced and young guns like Landon Donovan and DeMarcus Beasley. They beat the group favorites Portugal in their opening game 3-2 to announce themselves up 3-0 at halftime. They then tied host South Korea 1-1 in the second game before losing in the final group stage game to Poland, but made it through to the knockout rounds. There, they beat their rivals Mexico 2-0 in the round of 16 for a trip to the quarterfinals, the furthest they've gone in the modern format, and one of the key moments in what has become a long history of 2-0 for the U.S. against their rivals Mexico. They lost the next game 1-0 to finalist Germany on a controversial no handball call, with Torsten Frings clearing the ball off the line as Landon Donovan looked to put the U.S. equal at 1-1. Landon Donovan ended up being voted the best young player at the entire tournament. The 2006 was not the U.S.'s best work. They bowed out in the group stages, but held eventual champions Italy to a 1-1 tie. And then in 2010, it was go USA. They drew England in their opening game, an unfortunate Clint Dempsey long-range strike. They then drew Slovenia after being down 2-0 at halftime in their second game, coming back to storm to a 2-2 draw, and they ended up beating Algeria in stoppage time to clinch the top of the group. And that is the famous call from Ian Darke as Tim Howard threw the ball out in the dying moments of the game in stoppage time. Landon Donovan and Josie Altidore leading the break, and eventually the fumbled shot on goal that Landon Donovan tucked away that led to an eruption across the nation like we had never seen before. 2014, the U.S. was placed in the group of death, and it led to the emergence of the title Secretary of Defense for Tim Howard. Clint scored the opening goal 1 minute into the opening game versus Ghana. Then they drew Portugal 2-2 as Portugal tied it in stoppage time in the second half and ended up losing 1-0 to their head coach Jurgen Klinsmann's native Germany in the final group stage game. A very friendly 1-0 loss that worked out for both teams as both moved on to the knockout round. They ended up losing in the round of 16 in extra time to Belgium, Chris Wondolowski missing a big opportunity late on to win it, and Tim Howard recording a record 15 saves in one match. 2018 we won't talk about because they weren't there. Jurgen Klinsmann was fired 2 games into the qualifying cycle after losing the opener at home to Mexico and on the road at Costa Rica. Bruce Arena took over. Eventually, he just needed a tie on the final day of qualifying against already eliminated Trinidad and Tobago on the road to clinch a spot at the World Cup. They ended up losing 2-1 in Cuba. But the U.S. had a turnaround under Greg Berhalter, and they returned to the World Cup in 2022. They did so opening up with ties against England and Wales before Christian Pulisic put his body on the line to make it a 1-0 victory over Iran in the final group stage game and clinch their spot back into the round of 16. There, they lost to the Netherlands, but it was the start of a strong rebuild for the U.S. men's national team. I skipped over 2 of the bigger moments in history because I wanted to highlight their importance and significance in a little more detail. The 1950 World Cup is a little bit of an overlooked chapter in the U.S. soccer history, but it was a huge deal. England had refused to join FIFA before World War II, and the country that invented the game and was considered the best in the world had never played at a World Cup. They made their debut at the 1950 World Cup in Brazil. England won their first game, but then played the U.S. in the second group stage match and lost 1-0 in Belo Horizonte. Joe Gation scored the game winner, deflecting a shot at center forward. He was a Haitian national. He had come to the U.S. for school at Columbia. He was allowed to play under USSF rules even without a passport, as he intended to apply for citizenship. He ended up the match winner, and he was carried off the field by Brazil fans. It is considered one of, if not the greatest upset in World Cup history. The team was comprised of mostly amateur players, and it contributed to this underdog mentality, us versus the world, that we saw throughout the years in U.S. soccer players, like our own Clint Dempsey. While the tournament received little recognition at the time, it's now considered one of the defining moments of American soccer. Jumping ahead 44 years was another big one, the 1994 World Cup. The U.S. at the time didn't have a first division professional league, so they signed a number of their players to full-time contracts and put them in a permanent training ground at Mission Viejo in California with coach Bora Milutinovic, who had coached Mexico at their home World Cup in 1986. The U.S. played a ton of friendlies with these players to prepare, including 34 of them in 1993 with both the Gold Cup and Copa America, and 52 in the 18 months before the kickoff of the World Cup. The U.S. kicked off against Switzerland in Detroit in the Pontiac Silverdome. It was the first ever World Cup match played indoors, but the stadium was built for NFL, so there was no air conditioning, and the reports are that the temperatures were in the 90s inside the building. Eventually, Eric Winalda scored one of the best U.S. men's national team goals of all time with a long-distance upper 90 free kick to tie 1-1. The second game, it was versus favorites Colombia. Pelé had picked them as his tournament favorites to win the World Cup. The U.S. went on to win 2-1 with the opening goal, an own goal from Andres Escobar. Andres Escobar, the leader of the Colombian national team, would go on to be murdered in Colombia 11 days later, part of what was terrible fallout from this moment, as well as a sign of the violence across Colombia. Later in this match, Ernie Stewart made it 2-0 before a late goal for Colombia pulled it back 2-1. There were 93,000 pro-USA fans in the Rose Bowl that day cheering the U.S. on to this historic victory. It was the first time that the U.S. had ever played a game in front of a crowd this large that were purely fans of their team. They went on to lose the final group stage game 1-0 to Romania and had to wait 2 more days to find out that they clinched the spot to move on as a top third place team. They then lost to Brazil 1-0 in the round of 16 on July 4th at Stanford Stadium. But they went toe-to-toe with the Giants. And if Tab Ramos hadn't had his skull fractured approaching halftime by Leonardo, who went on to be red-carded, the U.S. may have been able to break through. 3.6 million people attended the World Cup, still the record, with an average of 69,000 people per game. This tournament made players household names like Tony Meola, Kobe Jones, and Alexi Lalas. The tournament itself is remembered as a huge moment for so many soccer fans. When supporters talk about their fandom, when it started, so many point to the 1994 World Cup. Plus, it's just remembered as a fun tournament. The denim kit, the opening ceremonies, Bebeto's rocking the baby Selly, Lalas' hair, and so much more. Of course, the U.S. automatically qualified as hosts for the 2026 World Cup, but that doesn't mean the past few years have been straightforward or simple. Coming out of the 2022 World Cup, the head coach Greg Berhalter's contract was up. But after reports of previous abuse against his wife in college in the 1990s, the U.S. Soccer Federation launched a full investigation to see if any laws had been broken and if Greg Berhalter was even eligible to be hired once again as the coach. BJ Callahan served as interim, winning the CONCACAF Nations League and eventually losing in the semifinals of the Gold Cup. Greg Berhalter was later reappointed on June 16th and took over at the end of the summer. He went on to lose in the group stage of the 2024 Copa America with an upset loss to Panama. He was fired directly after the tournament. Later, in September of 2024, Mauricio Pochettino was named head coach for the U.S. men's national team. Pochettino is the biggest name to ever lead the U.S. men's national team. He came off coaching Chelsea, Paris Saint-Germain, Tottenham, Southampton, and Espanyol already in his career. He's an acolyte of one of the legends in Marcelo Bielsa, and he played 20 times for Argentina as a player, including at the World Cup. The U.S. struggled, though, initially under him, losing in the Nations League to Panama and then the Gold Cup final to Mexico. But that seemed to have been the turning point. A big finish to 2025 with wins over Paraguay and Australia, who conveniently are going to be in the U.S. World Cup group, and a historic win over Uruguay, the biggest win over a team ranked that high in U.S. men's national team history. There's a lot of talent in this team, More Americans are playing in Europe than ever before, with big names like Christian Pulisic, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Timothy Weah, Florian Balogun, Chris Richards, Jedi Robinson, Serginho Dest, and Gio Reyna. But the big knock on the squad has been that they can't win the big game, that they don't have that edge that previous teams had, that us against the world mentality. But according to Deuce, there's still a little bit of fire with this team.
It's almost like a rebuild of figuring out how to get the fight back into the team mixed with quality. And in these last 6 games, being undefeated in them, especially in the last game, 5-1 against Uruguay, you can start to feel like this team's got something about them. They got more of a bite to them in front of goal. And when you got a team that fights and has that quality in front of goal, that's what gets fans excited about watching again.
There are a ton of young stars who will need to step up for the U.S. They were the youngest team at the 2022 World Cup, and we have seen those players as they've grown, still just entering their prime. But the youngest player coming through that I am most excited about is Diego Luna. Fierce, feisty, the spiritual heir, many say, to Clint Dempsey's scrappy throne. The 22-year-old RSL midfielder has been praised for his USMNT performances over the past year. At the start of 2025, in a friendly versus Costa Rica, Luna took an elbow to the face, breaking his nose. But he kept playing, with cotton shoved up his nose, and even provided an assist before going to the hospital for treatment. The display earned the respect of Pochettino, who played him during last summer's Gold Cup, where he scored 3 goals and had several standout performances. Known for his work rate, hustle, ball control, and ability in tight spaces, Luna has become a real fan favorite. He is the essence of what many see for the U.S. national team. He is the child of immigrants who went out and found his own career path after being given up on and being told he wasn't athletic enough and would never be a full pro. He was told he wouldn't be a national team player, and he has fought his way in. And as many of the USMNT stars are getting dragged for, some say, their lack of heart, lack of connection to that grittiness, intensity, Diego Luna feels like a symbol of that old school tenacity and what we want this national team to represent. When you talk about legends for the U.S. men's national team, we got to go with our guy, the pride of Nacogdoches, the one and only Clint Dempsey. A club career that led him from Major League Soccer's New England Revolution in the Super Draft across the pond to successful stints with Fulham and Tottenham before returning to finish out his career with the Sounders. Dempsey's a pioneer and an icon. The only American man to score at 3 different World Cups. Tied for all-time leading men's goal scorer in American history, Dempsey's the reason that so many people fell in love with the game in this country, and it's the way he did it. The work ethic, the skill, the confidence, and pride. He tried shit, and he was good at it. When talking about some of his favorite career moments, they're the ones you'd probably think, but maybe not for the reasons you'd expect.
I would say the first goal I ever scored in a World Cup against Ghana. It's what I dreamed about as a kid, is representing my country in a World Cup and scoring. My parents being there, that went through all the sacrifices and know the struggles of the ups and downs of trying to make it in this game and get to the top. And the second one, an opportunity for me to be captain for this national team in the World Cup in 2014 in Brazil. You wanted to be someone who stepped up in a big occasion, especially being the captain. More importantly, to get us on track to trying to get out of that group. But my wife and kids were there at this one, as well as my mom, my dad, and brothers and sisters. So that's what made it a little bit more special, is having the wife and kids along with my parents, that just to share in that moment. But it's always been what I dreamed about as a kid, is to represent my national team, play in the World Cup. But to have the armband as well, it was icing on the cake.
But what's even more important about Clint, he symbolizes the American mentality and swagger. Even now, reflecting on his career, Clint is classic Clint.
I accepted the challenges. I wanted to play against the best. Why would you be at the World Cup if you don't want to play against the best, right? There's some people that never get a chance to test themselves against the best in their profession, right? That's something that I always wanted to do, man. I'm a country boy from Nacogdoches, Texas. I want to see where I stack up against everybody in the world. Line them up and see what we got, right? Like, that's always been me. That's always been my mentality. And, the not knowing would have ate at me and killed me, for the rest of my life. And I think that's what lets me, go to bed easy at night. I have no regrets. I challenged myself and I took risk and I bet on myself and I got to have those experiences. So I think the American mentality is, you're always going to fight to the end. You're going to represent where you're from. You're going to be passionate about your country. and the state that you're from. It's important to not be scared of what you're up against.
The United States will play its 3 group games in LA and Seattle, 2 great American soccer cities. But there will be so many incredible places on display this summer. You've got Atlanta, a city that has one of the most special cultures in the country. It is a culture that is unique from anywhere around the world. And with the stadium downtown, you can really experience the city and get to your games and get back. I would highly recommend, if you get a chance, to go to a World Cup game in Atlanta. Houston and Dallas will host. Miami will host. One of my favorite cities in Philadelphia will be a host. Again, the link, a great place to go watch a game, just connected to downtown. And of course, it is going to be the United States' 250th anniversary. The Declaration of Independence signed in Philadelphia on July 4th. There's going to be a game that day. It is going to be an electric experience. But one of the ones I want to make sure to point out is Kansas City. I always have a blast in Kansas City. I find it a city with people who are really passionate about so many different topics, whether it's food or drink or architecture or history, and you feel it come out when you're in the city. It's easy to get around. People are friendly, and the games there ended up being some of the best, at least in the group stage. The U.S. was drawn into Group D with Paraguay, Australia, and a yet-to-be-determined European playoff. It's a straightforward group draw. It's as good as the U.S. could have gotten, and passage into the knockout rounds is expected. Realistically, no matter the opponents, and even with the extra round, anything less than a quarterfinal appearance is going to be considered a disappointment. But this feels like a team that's coming together at the right time, as Mauricio Pochettino has remained steadfast in his belief that he is building a culture that can maintain during a big-time tournament. So I'm excited to watch this team play. Well, we love to leave you with a fun fact about all the countries we are talking about. For the United States, there are many. The first one being, of course, it is where I am from. That is the funnest fact possible. But the fun fact that I wanted to land on here is something maybe people don't think about when they think about the U.S., especially ones who might be traveling for this World Cup. When you think about the U.S., you think about the big cities, you think about the metropolises, you think about New York and L.A., Atlanta, Miami, all of these places. But the U.S. is the birth of the national park. The first ever national park in world history was a Yellowstone National Park. It sits across a couple different states, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. It's one of the biggest national parks in the country. But since then, it has exploded. There are over 60 national parks in the U.S. And if you're going to be traveling to the U.S. or around the U.S. this summer, I'd highly recommend looking up what's around you. That is one of the great attractions in the U.S. They are some of the best in the world. There are now national parks in over 100 countries around the world, but the ones in the U.S., they range from lowlands and waters to beaches, rivers, mountains, deserts, everything in between. There is one within distance of all the World Cup host cities, and they are worth your time. So thank you so much for listening here. Thank you so much for being with us. This U.S. recording is our 42nd episode of these national bio packs that we put together. We've still got 6 more countries that we are waiting to learn in March at the World Cup playoffs, both the Intercontinental and the UEFA. So we will be having 6 more episodes come out, but this feed is going to stay active as we are going to be rolling out our weekly World Cup coverage show starting very, very soon. And that will be moving even more regular as we get into the World Cups. Thank you once again to all of you for listening. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.